When I began putting this program together, what I wanted to do was to put together a group of birds that were common, that everyone would know, perhaps some that you're not too familiar with, but I wanted to make sure that I shared with you things that you might not know about most of the birds. There are some things that are unusual about some of our birds. I picked spring because in spring we probably have more kinds of birds than at any other time of year. And I don't mean kinds by species, but kinds by appearance, because we have the young of those birds that are breeding here. We have wintering birds that haven't left yet right now, and we'll have some wintering birds here until the 1st of May or early May, sometimes even June. And we have migrants that are just passing through. So we have a tremendous diversity of bird life, both in species and in the appearance of birds. So I want to share with you some of those appearances and some of my favorite birds, and I hope some of your favorite birds too. Yellow-throated warbler is a bird that looks the same year-round. It doesn't have different plumages. Male and female are similar, and they show up here in the wintertime, and we have them here in nesting in Florida in pine and hardwoods to some extent. These birds often move like a nuthatch. In fact, they can immediately be thought of as a nuthatch, but they're not. They are warblers, and they winter in South Florida. And not to be confused, yellow-throated warbler is not the same as the yellow throat, which is also a warbler. And it's also one of my favorite birds. I sort of grew up with a common yellow throat. This is the male, and the female looks just like this without the black mask or the white line over the eye going back. It is just a dull greenish and yellowish bird that you try to figure out what it is, but it's there. These are common in wet places. They do nest here, and we also have a lot more here in the wintertime. The common yellow throat is the one that goes witchety, witchety, witchety in its call. And a trick you can notice on a windy day with any bird, I did this trick with a common yellow throat that I banded so that I could show these slides. If a bird's eyes are relatively larger than those of mammals, and birds depend a great deal on their sense of vision, but their large eyes need internal support. And so inside that eye of each bird, not just yellow throats, but every bird, is a donut-shaped ring of bones that provides support. And as a result of that support on the inside of the eye, a bird can't move its eyes like you can. You can sit looking straight at the screen and turn your eyes to the right, to the left, up and down, and a bird cannot do that. But it's very important for a bird to be able to cast its gaze on something that might be moving, that might be a predator. And so if it's a windy day sitting on a branch, as the branch is moving up and down or back and forth, the bird has to, in order to maintain its gaze at that, whatever that is, it has to move its head and neck. So here the bird on the left is a bird that is calm, that has just been banded, and the bird on the right is the same bird, and I simply moved my hand down, and it was staring at me because I was holding it, and it wanted to keep its gaze on me. So in order to keep its gaze on me, it had to extend its neck upward. But you can do that up and down, sideways, and the bird's head and neck will move appropriately, going to the right or to the left or up or down. And it's a characteristic of all birds. Common snipe I put in here because it is one of my favorite birds on campus at Florida Gulf Coast University around the ponds. You find them next to the water in dense vegetation usually. And um, many of the birds, such as warblers, are colorful and they live in dense vegetation. But birds such as the common snipe that often live in more open habitats and they're ground loving and they're out in the open water where there's vegetation are camouflaged for survival so that they blend in so that a predator flying overhead is less likely to see them. Snipe are winter residents in South Florida, but some nest in North Florida, and some of them are still with us down here into May. So this is a bird that you might look for along the edge of waterways, especially where the water is very shallow. This was truly a bird of wetlands, and I use that word wetland the way it should be used. A wetland is wet land, and it's shallow water so that even a bird like this can walk through it. I photographed this bird on our campus, but I used to see them very frequently at the Babcock Ranch up in Charlotte County, out in the agricultural fields and some of the areas there because they still have wetlands there. A wetland is not a golf course pond. It's not a canal. It is land that is wet part of the year and dry part of the year. And as a result, it has two peaks of visitation by a totally different set of birds. In the rainy years, rainy months of the year, the birds will be waders and shorebirds and things that come to the shallow water for food. And when it's dry, in the dry months of the year, there will be lots of insects out there in the field because there's lots of new plants coming up and lots of food for them. And we get meadowlarks and all kinds of other grassland birds in particular, or shrubby birds that appear there. The common starling is a bird that you say you don't really need any introduction to, and who wants to talk about starlings? I have to tell you that the starling was one of the first birds I learned. And I wrote a poem years ago about it because when I was 9 years old, I had a paper route delivering the Des Moines Register newspaper. And one snowy winter morning, it was a morning paper, the Des Moines Register is, and I was out, and there, perched on top of one of the boxes in which I put papers for sale, was this bird that was so beautiful. It was spotted all over, and it just captured my imagination. And I wrote this poem titled "The Most Beautiful Bird I Ever Saw," and it was about the European starling. And then I began learning more and more about it. And this is the only photo in this presentation that is not mine. This photo was taken by Rick Bunting, who lives now up where there's lots of snow, and he sent me this photo so I could use it. In the winter, starlings are very spotted like this, but the spots are simply white tips on all of their feathers, all of the feathers that are contour feathers that cover the body. Their bill is black or very dark color. This one is lighter than most that I remember. So they start the winter with a black bill and start the spring with a black bill. They have it all winter long, and then their bill gradually changes to yellow for the breeding season. Here's the common starling in spring here in Naples, and I'm sure you can see some up there, but you may not know that you can identify the sexes of starlings by looking at the base of the bill on the bird. And if you look at the base of the female's bill, it's pink right in this area. And over here on the male, it's blue. Isn't that convenient? The pink for girls and blue for boys. But it's a way to tell the difference. But another way in which you can sex them, the male is more vocal and does a lot of singing in protecting his territory. And when he's singing, his feathers of the throat stick out, as you can see here. And he has feathers on his chest that are very long and very narrow. And the feathers on the chest of the female are not quite so long, and they're much broader. They're about twice as wide as those on the male. So you can tell a starling in either way. And look, there are no spots on the breast anymore. That is not a result of molt. It is a result of the white tips wearing off through the winter. And oops, I didn't mean to do that. How do we go back? I guess we don't need to go back. At any rate, on the female there, you could see some spots down on the belly that were there. Northern cardinal is everybody's favorite, and it's a favorite of backyard birds of lots of people who don't know anything about birds, but they know that red bird that's out there. And the red bird is, of course, the male cardinal with his red body plumage and his bright red bill. And the female has the bright red bill, and so you might guess that that would be a cardinal also, but she has rather dull plumage, and that's to protect her because she's the one that's going to be sitting on the nest. The male will help bring food, but very often gives it to the female, who gives it to the young, but the female is there. But these are not the only plumages that you see, and there is other variation that shows up in the spring of the year, although down here you can see it at almost any time of year. Cardinals nest frequently, and they can have up to 6 nests in a year, a single pair of cardinal. And there's a good reason for that, because the nests are down low, the young are vulnerable to predators, and the adults are vulnerable to predators, and they lose most of them, but they are capable of nesting as many as 6 times a year in South Florida. And these are what the cardinal kids look like, quite different from the adults, mostly in the color of the bill. If they had a red bill, you might recognize them as a cardinal, but the young birds, when they leave the nest, have an almost black bill, and it gradually changes until there's red all over, except right in this region on the bill, right sort of in the middle of both the upper and the lower bill. There'll be a little tiny black spot, and you can identify birds of the year by that, and they usually lose that in the fall of the year. They may keep it for several weeks or even months sometimes, but these are young cardinals, and the adults will sometimes bring them to the feeder. This is a young male, and he is molting into his adult plumage. So he's got some bright red feathers now, but he started out looking like this also. And this is everybody's favorite bird, the nonpareil, which is what the French called in Louisiana the painted bunting, that we call it. And this is the adult male. And this is a bird at Corkscrew Sanctuary, where they put out feeders just for the painted buntings, because everyone wants to see the painted buntings. I volunteer at Corkscrew, and they've done a lot of changes out there, and they have not put the feeders out this year at all. They took the feeders in because people would gather in groups around the feeders watching the birds. And they don't want people to, they want people to social distance. So they took the feeders out. That's, I think, very frustrating. And I think we should have the feeders out and just tell people to social distance. But this is the male as an adult. And this is a female painted bunting, but it could also be a young male. In the second year of life, the male painted buntings still look like this. And as a result, the young male has a chance to be successful as a breeder. He could steal copulation with a female, and by looking like a female, he's accepted by the males, and the males don't drive him away. The bird on the left and on the right is a yellow-bellied sapsucker that was visiting a coconut palm at Eagle Lakes Park here in Naples, and I photographed it in December, December 31st, New Year's Eve, in at the sap wells. First of all, it was a poor choice of trees for a sapsucker, because palms are not trees. They are a more distant relative of trees, and they do not have vessels all around the surface of the trunk. They have their vessels that take nutrients up and down, scattered throughout the stem of a palm. And so you have to tap a lot of holes to find any sap, to get any sap coming out. And I thought at first, when I first saw the bird, I thought it was a female. But if you look closely, it is starting to get a red throat. There's a red feather here and a red feather there, and there's red feathers on the other side as well. The female has a white throat. The male has a red throat, the adult male does. And this is part of the juvenile plumage, all of this reticulated pattern on the back and on the belly here. And the second picture I took just a week or so ago on the 13th of March. And it's the same bird. You can see the two red spots that are still there. It's got a couple more red spots now. It has still stayed around, so I know it's the very same bird, but it is losing the reticulated pattern on the side. It has lost the reticulated pattern on the back, and it's gaining the yellow belly, for which the sapsucker gets its name, the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Sapsuckers are interesting birds in a number of ways. One is that they're migratory. They don't breed in Florida at all. They nest up in the northern tier states into Ohio and places like that, as far south as Ohio, and into Canada. And it gets cold up there. And so the sapsuckers all migrate, but the female yellow-bellied sapsucker migrates a much longer distance on average, going even into South America, northern South America, and the Central America and the Caribbean. And if you see a sapsucker down there, it's most likely going to be a female or a juvenile. The males will migrate too, but they'll only go 200 or 300 miles south, just so there's enough warmer climate that there's going to be some sap flow. And by doing so, they have to be able to withstand cold weather. But by withstanding the cold weather and feeding on trees 200 or 300 miles south, they are going to be more acclimated to the cold weather, and they can return earlier on migration to set up their territories, which is what they do. And so the female, she stays down in the sand and the sunshine and enjoying the beach and until it gets warm, and then she finally goes back north and she selects a mate, the mate who has selected and is defending the best territory for her to raise her young. And so these are young, this is a young male, and he'll be going back, but next year he probably won't be coming this far south. If you notice, the sap wells are in horizontal rows. That's a sign that the sapsucker is looking for sweet sap and not finding it. If they find a vessel that has sweet sap, then they begin making vertical rows of holes, following the vein of sap that they found that is sweet. Now, the sweet sap is a characteristic of trees that are either a sugar maple or a tree that is infected with a fungal disease that is killing the tree. And the tree is trying to fight back. So it makes sweet sap in order to fight off the infection. And that's what the sapsuckers are looking for. Sapsuckers don't injure the tree, don't kill the tree by pecking these holes. All they're doing is telling you that, hey, this tree isn't well, it's sick, it's dying, and it's producing lots of sugar for me as it dies. So you don't see any vertical rows here because there's not much sap there, but they will enlarge each of these, not each of them, but many of them each winter, and they'll add 2 or 3 new ones to the end of a row, making the row longer, and they'll return to the same tree year after year. Double-crested cormorant also undergoes plumage changes in spring like that sapsucker does, as young from a previous year molt into adult plumage, and facial colors are transformed. So in the background here is a second year double-crested cormorant. It's got a yellowish bill, a yellowish face. It's got a white breast, and it's got some black feathers, but it's not totally black like the adults are. This is probably a third year double-crested cormorant, or maybe it's an adult that is just still in its winter plumage. It has a little bit more color in the plumage, and the bill is a light orange. This is an adult. It looks like an ugly adult. And notice its turquoise eyes. All of the double-crested cormorants have turquoise eyes. They're absolutely beautiful eyes. And when they are coming into breeding season, oh, I don't know how to go back on this. Oh yeah, here it is. When they're coming into breeding season, they also begin developing their crest. This is why it's called double crest. But only in the spring do you see these double crests. They have a little tuft of feathers on each side. So it's got 2 crests. And the orange throat becomes bright orange. And if you look at the bill from the side, you can see that it's got white lines on the bill. Sometimes they're much more characteristic, much more linear than these appear. And it's got a beautiful ring of light colored feathers around the eye, little tiny feathers on the eyelids that really give it an unusual look. Breeding adults develop their characteristic orange throat and double crest feathers in South Florida. And it's black, and up north, the double-crested cormorants that breed up north have gray to white feathers, but they don't get them down here. They don't get them until they go back, and then they get a white to gray crest. Brown pelicans in their winter attire have a totally white neck. And I say, think snow, because when the snow melts, it turns brown, and that's the spring attire of the adult brown pelican. So those are both adults, and the adult and with the brown on it is the one that, oh, come on, is the one that we see most of right now in adults. If you look down at the tip of the pelican's bill, you can see there's a white structure at the very tip. That's called a nail, and it is very hard protein, and it is to protect the bill from damage if it's grabbing for something down in the sand or at the bottom and it hits the sand. And the I guess I left out the juvenile. The juvenile is brown, and they remain in that brown plumage for the first 2 years. And it was a juvenile at Eagle Lakes Park that was eaten by a brown pellet, or by an alligator 2 weeks ago. And The juveniles often come inland to lakes to fish. They're mostly after exotic fishes, blue tilapia, for example, at the lakes at Eagle Lakes Park. Great blue herons also will carry their juvenile plumage, which is on the left, into their second year. And right now you can see some juveniles that look like this. The juvenile does not have a white crest, although it may be beginning to get one. And it doesn't have the long aigrettes on its chest. You think of aigrettes as being the feathers down the back, but the adult great blue heron during the breeding season also has these long filamentous feathers on its chest. You can also see a change in bill color. The juvenile has a strongly black upper bill as a juvenile, and the adult loses that so that it has more of an orange-yellow upper bill as well as lower bill. Little blue herons, I put this bird in first because this is a juvenile little blue heron. And I grew up as a kid in Iowa thinking that little blue herons, why do they call it blue? Because it's not blue, it's always white. All of the little blue herons I ever saw were white. And that's because after they leave the nest in the south, young little blue herons migrate north. And they go a long way. They'll go as far as Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, and other states. But they return in the winter. They leave in the spring and return in the winter to the south, never to go north again. So they never go north in their breeding plumage, in the gray color that the adults have. They only go up there when they're white. And then they mix in with snowy egrets and also now cattle egrets and forage with them. And the little blue heron adult here, or juvenile here, is one that I photographed at Corkscrew. For their first year, little blue herons are white, a tinge of blue on the black-tipped bill. You can see a little tinge of blue here. It's starting to get quite blue. It will tell you that it's a little blue, and the pale legs that it has will tell you that it's a little blue heron. And as they begin to transition to adulthood, they undergo a molt. And as with most birds, their molt is not all at once. The molt is one feather at a time on each side of the bird. And their molt is symmetrical so that they can maintain perfect flight as they're molting one feather at a time. And in this stage, you can see that it's molting its primary feathers, and the primary feathers here are new ones coming in, and over here there's new ones coming in. It's also molting some of its covert feathers over here, and they're coming in, and the same ones over here are coming in. So you can see how symmetrical the molt is. And the bird will begin to look something like this over a period of weeks as it molts different of its feathers coming into its adult plumage. And at this stage, it's commonly known as a calico heron. And we see them, and that's when it also begins to get a bluer bill. Even adult little blue herons, which are this steely blue-gray all over, can have different appearances. So this is probably a young bird that has just completed its molt into adulthood. It's still got light-colored legs, and it's more a gray than blue. And this is an adult little blue heron in breeding plumage. And you can see that in breeding plumage, this was March 28th of last year. And you can see that its bright blue colors are the colors that are going to help it out when it begins courtship and nesting. And it will have this brighter blue color with a black tip during the breeding season. The green heron is also one of my favorite birds. I grew up knowing that it was called a shitepoke. And if you don't know what a shitepoke is or what shitepoke means, it's simple, because this heron has the habit of living near small bodies of water, such as a little stream. And the hunters of the South in particular would be out hunting, and they'd walk up the creek because that was where the game was going to be associated with the water. And they would see this bird, and every time they stumbled across one, it would fly up the creek. And they'd go another 100 yards as they were hunting, and it would fly up the creek again. And every time it takes off to fly up the creek, it defecates, lightening the load for taking off. And so that shite is really Old English for the defecation material that comes out as it takes off. So it was called a shite poke, which means a bag of shite. And it was called fly up the creek because of its behavior that the hunters noticed. And some people still call it the fly up the creek because it does. So if you look close, why is it called a green heron? You can see just barely there's some iridescent green feathers right here on the wing. And you may think of the green heron as a stubby, short-necked, short-legged heron, but you'd be wrong. It is small, but it's not nearly as short-necked and short-legged as you usually see. And all you have to do is watch little green herons for a while, and you'll know that. Here's the same bird. Here is the same bird here. And look how it's standing up high on its legs, but its neck is in, and here it's got its neck extended. And look at that neck. It's got an incredible long neck, but it only uses that when it's looking in the distance for food or potential feeding site, or looking at something that might be a predator coming. But they will, when they land, after you've disturbed them, they will very often extend that neck as far as they can. And it also will raise its crest, making that head look even bigger. Whereas over here, it doesn't have the raised crest. White ibis are common in our yards down here. And usually if you see white ibis, you're going to see a flock of several that look like this, or a flock of several that look like this. These are second-year birds right now that look like this. And these are full adults. And the young ones will have almost flesh-colored legs and pinkish bill. The adults will have a pink bill with pinkish legs. Always a white ibis is going to have a white belly. And a glossy ibis may look brown like this on the back, may have a brown neck like this, but it's also going to have a brown belly. So don't think that you've got a glossy ibis just because it's got brown on its back. If it's got a white belly, it's a white ibis. And this is a white ibis in its breeding plumage. It's all white, and what changes is its skin color, and it becomes a very dark red on the face, very dark red on the bill with a black tip to the bill now, and legs that are also very dark red. And notice its eyes. You may not be able to see the color, but it's blue. And ibises have the adult ibis has a pretty blue eyes. Now this is a photo of an adult that's in breeding plumage. It doesn't have the black bill yet. It's just coming into breeding plumage. This was taken about right now. And one of the things you can see on the last adult that I showed you, and also on this one, is that the throat begins to swell. And it can develop into a sac that hangs down sometimes for 2 or 3 inches down. And interestingly, it's the female that has the most swollen neck. The male will have a swollen neck also, but not nearly as as swollen as that of the female. You can see the blue eyes again. Now, why I put this slide in is notice that this bird has these feathers of the back raised up. Why does it raise those feathers up? It's because it's out in the sun. The shirt that I have on is one that has one of those things that open up in the back. Why do you have a vent on the back side? It's for the same reason. And I'm guessing that whoever designed these shirts had been watching white ibis, because the heart is the organ in the body, that the muscle in the body that is doing the most work. It is active all the time as long as you're alive. And as a result, it is the source of the heat that gives you a body temperature of 98.6 degrees. It's because of that constant pumping of the heart. So the source of your heat is the heart. And when you're out and it's even hotter out there on your back, you want to cool off. And if you want to cool it off, you want to be able to cool the blood that is coming out of the heart. And your heart is right underneath that vent in the back of the shirt, and the heart of the bird is right here, right under where his vent is. And so this is a bird that's out in the sun. It's getting overheated, so it raises these feathers up to cool off the blood that's pumping through its heart. And birds normally have a normal body temperature of about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So they're even hotter than we are, but they don't like to get overheated either. So watch white ibis and you'll see this raising of the feathers on the back to cool off. Killdeer appearance also varies with age and behavior. Chicks typically have yellow skin around the eye, and they only have a single breast band, whereas the adult has orange-red around the eye and always has two breast bands. But if you watch killdeer very closely, you'll see that the width of the breast bands changes with their behavior. If a strange bird comes, a strange killdeer comes close, the male will raise the breast band, raise its neck up and expand the width of the breast band here as a territorial defense. It says, get away from me or I'm going to come after you. I'm bigger than you are. And the fighting between males in territorial disputes usually targets the black band. So down here you can see some white feathers. It looks like white feathers coming in there. That's where feathers were pulled out, knocked out by an opposing bird. Now, oh dear, I have some X-rated slides coming up next, but I wanted to show you how birds mate. And I just had to do this one. This is a pair of killdeer that were along a census route that I'm doing right now. And the male steps onto the back of the female if she will let him. She has to let him step onto the back. And at first he has his legs down like this till he gets his balance. And then he will stand up a little bit more and he will tread up and down with his feet like a cat. You'll see cats treading. And the female will twist her body around, and then the male will twist his body around the other way as he slips off and their cloacas come into contact. And that's it. That's all it is. It's referred to by ornithologists as a cloacal kiss because it happens so quickly. And all birds mate in that way. And these are some Florida mottled ducks. And I just photographed these last week. And the male is different from the female. He is dull colored like the female, and they look very similar, but the male is blacker, has less brown than the female has, and his bill is more olive colored, yellow green, and her bill is more brownish orange. So you can see the bill color difference on the one on the left. But ducks mate in the water, and the male will swim up fast behind the female and chase her, and then swim up over on her back, grab her on the back of the head, and push her head underwater. And if she can get away, she will if she wants to. But if not, then they will eventually, she will have her head underwater the whole time. And the male will slip over to the side, and she will twist around, and they mate underwater. Again, it's a cloacal kiss, just like the killdeer do. Now, these are black-necked stilts, and with really, really long legs. The male has a hard time getting onto the female's back, and they do mate sometimes when they're standing in the water. And here he's mating, he's slipping over to the side. And anyway, it's a real trick because he has a harder time keeping his balance. But when it's all over, in the end, the pair can walk off into the sunset, perhaps thinking of the chicks to come. Anyway, thank you very much.